Want to welcome to the show Associate Professor in Media and Communications at Victoria University and also the Chair of the Better Public Media Trust, Peter Thompson. Peter, good morning to you.
Kia ora, Pat. Thanks for having me on.
Love to have you on. I think it's an incredibly appropriate conversation for us to be having right about now. And we should start by putting up the Better Public Media Trust, the BPM. And why don't you just give us a bit of the elevator pitch as to who the BPM is and what you guys are all about?
Well, the Better Public Media Trust really has its origins in the Save TVNZ 7 campaign. As some of your viewers may recall, TVNZ 7 was a non-commercial channel that was operated by TVNZ, but unfortunately lost its funding around 2012. There was quite a big fuss about that because we thought it was rather good television. And what came out of that was then the Coalition for Better Broadcasting. And because the media issues that we're seeing evolve, in the digital environment are so complex and across multiple platforms, a while back we decided that we better call ourselves a Better Public Media Trust because we weren't just about broadcasting.
Yep. I well remember that actually. TVNZ 7 was great. I remember Russell Brown. We had some really good shows on there about. It was that perfect moment that we've been talking about for the last month or so here. That the apex of the decision making was based around stories, not around profit or agenda. It was just based around stories. No matter if you had a really small group that this story would be representing or whether it was a big mainstream group, that was the apex. And I think that's the beauty of public broadcasting in general is genuine public broadcasting. Like I think we all would probably look to the BBC as being one of the best models, that the apex of their decision making is based on the story rather than anything else, and that's what we need,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, TVNZ 7 offered a range of programs that you were never going to see on a commercial channel. And that included some really important ones. I mean, they had programs on law and the courts. They had Media 7, which was the only television program actually dealing with the media sector. They had programs on those backbenchers that introduced a lot of unfamiliar politicians to the public and cost one or two their careers. And then there were all sorts of other things, community issues, poetry, literature, things that you'd never see in a commercially focused broadcast that where the only agenda really is to maximize eyeballs and maximize advertising.
There was a story that you guys released or that you guys were involved in a couple of days ago, and it's the idea of funding TVNZ through a $60 individual levy. This is what you guys were saying. Let me just read a couple of quick paragraphs here. The Better Public Media Trust said TVNZ could be funded at a cost of $60 per person annually. Trustee Miles Thomas said it was inevitable more cuts would be needed as the organisation's commercial income shrank. TVNZ's annual budget is roughly $300 million. For the cost of just $5 a month per capita, New Zealand taxpayers could fully fund TVNZ so that it would need no longer rely on any advertising at all. So that's interesting. We've talked about this for a very long time, about TV1 being non-commercial advert free. But it sounds like what you guys are saying is the whole TVNZ brand. Am I right in that?
Well, I think we have to clarify something from the start, and that is that the headline's a bit misleading.
Okay.
It came in the context of us trying to identify how much we invest as a society in public media, and compared with other small advanced economies, for example the Scandinavian countries, we lag well behind in terms of our per capita investment. So the idea was not that each individual would have to pay. It was a matter of saying how much would it cost on a per capita basis to actually make TVNZ non-commercial. So the model that we'd actually prefer is not a bill or a license fee coming through your letterbox, but a broad-based levy model that would go on commercial media revenues and starting with digital advertising spend. And if you put say a 1% levy on digital advertising, that market's worth about $1.8 billion a year. So that'd be 18 million for a start. If you made it 5%, that all of a sudden that starts becoming a lot more significant.
Yeah.
You're getting up to $90 million a year. Now, maybe that's too much. You could spread a levy, though, across other services, streaming services like Netflix that don't invest in local content. We know that the local production community would love it if they would contribute something to local content production. We have a telecommunications development levy. We could easily extend that and use that to provide support for the sorts of content. Because you've got to remember, nearly all the services that we now access through these digital channels are built on a backbone of a digital infrastructure which the public paid for. We put about $2 billion into ultra-fast broadband rollout, and including wireless broadband in rural areas. So what we're really saying is that the commercial market that profits the most from the functions of the commercial media market should be asked to put something back to keep essential services such as journalism going. Now, TVNZ is one issue because, of course, they've just announced some significant cuts, and the loss of programs like Fair Go, I think sends shockwaves through the system. That's been an institution for decades.
Yeah.
So the idea that these programs that really matter to a lot of New Zealanders are suddenly going to be cast aside for commercial purposes, I think really does underline the need for a different model. So the idea that we should totally take away the advertising in TVNZ and fund it publicly, I think is, to be fair, is a big ask. I don't think the current government will want to go there. But if you don't do anything, TVNZ is based on a commercial mass advertising model that is very, very rapidly corroding. And it's not going to be able to sustain the range of programs that we've become used to. So you've got to do something about it. And we think the levy model is probably the best option that would cover a wide range of functions, not just TVNZ, but also to support public interest journalism.
So what I hear you saying, if I'm to nutshell that back to you, is that levies, taxes, fees on other potentially international broadcasters, what they're doing, would pay for local broadcasting free. I mean, when we've talked about this from the ignorant base that we approach this world from, we have talked about like a broadcasting fee and that sort of thing, like what happens in the UK. Why not go down that path? Why not introduce a broadcasting fee, whether it's through taxes or through a cost or through a bill through the door, as you've said? Because $300 million for all of TVNZ doesn't seem like a heck of a lot to generate, from within New Zealand as well.
Well, I think it's your frame of reference here. I mean, if you went to talk to other countries and talked about 300 million New Zealand dollars, they think that was pocket change.
Yeah.
But of course, some BBC gets funded on a scale that we could never achieve in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We just don't have enough people, and our economy is not big enough. But I think the problem with going back to a license fee model is we used to have this up to 1999. And there were concerted efforts, notably from the political right and taxpayers, who resented the idea of having to pay, a license fee. So I think it would be deeply, deeply unpopular to go back and explain the merits of a return to the license fee. But if you said, well, let's have a digital services tax, starting with Google and Meta, and maybe extending into other services. I mean, if you had to pay, a couple of dollars on your internet bill, we already do. Nobody rioted in the streets. If internet services and other kinds of media had an extra charge added to it, spread across a wide range of consumers, it's going to raise that kind of money in a way that nobody's really going to be offended. And if you want to go the whole hog, you could apply a levy to audiovisual retail. I mean, that is a huge market. Harvey Norman and Noel Leemings won't thank me for saying this, but if you put a 1% levy on televisions, computers, mobile phones, even software, all that kind of technology, that's a $6-7 billion market. You'd be raising another $60-70 billion a year. And those are the means through which we access all this content. So a little bit of payment on top of those kinds of goods and services would mean that we actually sustain a range of really important public interest content that actually we do want to be able to access.
Yeah.
And so, for me, it's a no-brainer to set it up like that. And the beauty of it is that in some ways, maybe rather cheekily, it's a polluter pays principle. the media that make profits out of the digital market and often cause the market failures that we lament, such as the demise of serious investigative news or high quality programming for minorities, they're actually expected to put something back to sustain an essential range of services. So there's a kind of a moral elegance to this model.
What you're describing, though, still is New Zealanders paying, because whether it's a $2 on their internet bill or whether it's $30 on a $3,000 TV, that's still us paying for it as a part of it. So other than shaping it differently, how is that very different from saying, well, here's a $25 broadcasting fee, license fee?
Well, for one thing, one of the things that people who pay license fees object to is the idea that they're being forced to pay for something that they don't use. And what the levy model would do quite effectively is ensure that actually you're only paying in proportion to your own media expenditure. So if you didn't go and buy a new TV or a new phone every year, if you didn't subscribe to Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime, then actually you wouldn't be required to pay at all.
But it's I get this, but it's the same argument. If I have a Netflix account and I never watch TVNZ and there's a levy on my Netflix account, I'm still paying for something that I don't use. I mean, that argument gets used for a lot of sort of taxes. I mean, taxes that are in petrol. If I don't have a car but I fill up my lawnmower, I'm paying for something I'm never going to use for the road user charges element out of there. So I understand what you're saying, that might be, I guess what I'm saying, and maybe this is me just dreaming, as a well-educated New Zealand wouldn't have that argument unless they went, well, there's so many things that we don't use that we pay for. You know what I'm saying? And actually not using public broadcasting, for example, I think is almost impossible, because so much other content can come from the public broadcasting that they are going to come across it somewhere.
Well, of course they are. And in fact, if you take RNZ, for example, it shares a lot of its news. So if you're reading any kind of news platform in Aotearoa, New Zealand, you're probably going to find RNZ content. And by and large, it's good content. And the key thing is that news in particular, we maybe argue about other genres, entertainment genres, but news, information, documentaries, educational content is what we call a merit good. Because in economic terms, a merit good is a good or a service that doesn't only benefit the consumer who actually consumes it, it has a benefit to society as a whole. So if we have a better informed, better educated society, that's generally good. So even if I don't watch a particular news program, if it's good news and someone else has watched it, society itself indirectly benefits from that. So I think there's a good case for that. You don't see too many people protesting against primary schools saying, hey, I don't have kids, why do I have to pay to educate this bunch of brats? And that's really how I hear the arguments against public media, going, no, I don't watch that, I'm not paying for it. Well, but that's
what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you educate them to being that exact point, yes, we all of, I mean, it's like the pacifists in America paying taxes that go to the military. We all do this on some level. And I know what you're saying, and I think what you're saying is correct about that sort of, I don't want to pay for it. But if they were then educated as to all the other things that we pay for that we don't want to, you could possibly, maybe like I said, it's a bit Pollyanna thinking we can educate an audience that doesn't want to be educated, but maybe we could.
Yeah, I think look, I get the argument, Pat, and it comes from a right liberal economic position, where everybody has to only pay for what they consume, and anything else is an imposition that can't be justified. Well, in that case, you become what we call a minimal statist. In fact, you might be a right-wing anarchist and not want a government at all. But the thing I throw at them is this: advertising. So nobody makes a fuss about advertising. We think there's too much of it. We might not like it. We may even pay to avoid the ads. But the advertising that we see goes on top of the goods and services that we buy in the supermarket, regardless of whether or not we buy the goods that have been advertised. So ironically, in a sense, you could see advertising as a stealth tax, and it's on a much larger scale, $3.6 billion a year. They're not advertising as a public gesture of charity. They're advertising because it gets us to buy their products, and they do it by stealing our data.
Yeah, yeah, no,
So,
look, this could become a whole new conversation down that path as well, Peter. But listen,
yeah,
just
but
finally,
my
what I'd
point,
like to know, I see that Melissa Lee was making comments yesterday about how she can quote unquote support the media industry that's in a bit of a fragile state at the moment. Over the next few days and weeks, what do you want to see coming from policy or even just a position from Melissa Lee in her position as communications minister about the whole area of public broadcasting?
well, I don't know exactly what the minister's going to do. I don't think they can be seen to do nothing. I think that would be probably suicidal in the current environment. There's so many people struggling in the media sector that I think the government's going to be under real pressure to be seen to act. So let them watch Netflix and leave it to the market isn't a
Yeah.
viable option. Um, One thing they've got currently in the pipeline is this Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill. Personally, I think it's well intentioned, but I don't think it's going to
Well,
do the job that they
well,
want.
Facebook's pulling out of that agreement in Australia as we speak, so I don't think that's going to
Yeah,
go anywhere. But what would you like to see Melissa Lee and the government come out with to
I'd,
support the public broadcaster?
I'd like to see them go towards the levy model,
Right.
starting perhaps with digital advertising. That's and digital services more broadly. Now, there's different ways you can implement this. I think one sensible way that I think would get the buy-in of the platforms is if you didn't just target the platforms and single them out, although Lord knows there's some good reasons for that, but actually spread it across the board. So if you started with digital advertising, that I think would be a good starting point, and you get an immediate return, at least as much as the much maligned public interest journalism fund. And from there, you could build. I mean, you could start to build in the telecommunications development levy, and maybe look at including the streaming platforms. That's where I'd start off. And then you can start to look at what they're doing in Europe, and that things like the digital services taxes that they're exploring there are based primarily on digital turnover of the platforms. And that is huge. And we know that, for example, Google pulls in something like $1.2 billion of that $1.8 billion digital ad spend. And they make profits on top of that through selling data and personal data. So they account for nearly 2/3 of that advertising. So the idea that they just sit there, throw a few crumbs from the table to the news media and think that they've done their bit, I think we really got to look very seriously at making them pay their way. They don't pay taxes on anywhere near the level of profits that they generate for the parent company, but through creative accounting, they manage to register those earnings offshore, so they don't get liable for domestic taxation. And I know the Treasury Department would love to do something about that, but I don't think it should go to the consolidated fund. I think that should be going into supporting the media sector. So those are the things that I think I'd be looking at. Start with digital taxation, and then start looking at getting the big platforms to pay their dues and pay taxes properly. And then you ring fence that, and you put that into the public media sector on a broad scale, not just TVNZ, but a range of different media.
Very good. From a Better Public Media Trust, that is Peter Thompson. Peter, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Pat. My pleasure.